And I just want to repeat just so that you know very, very quickly, Marc Pfitzer from the FSG International Shared Value Initiative, Ryan Short after him from Genesis Analytics, the guy who sort of moved from the light side or the dark side, whatever that was, I sort of remember that, right? Derek Bouwer from, well, it says former TBWA. We don't know what you're doing quite now. What do you do now?
I've taken early retirement.
Okay, there we are.
So I wish.
We can stick around for the next 2 days. Right. David Blyth from Yellowwood, and the last person, that's Miles Murphy, who's the CEO, the founder as well of an agency called Liquorice. So he's the only one of the 5 that did not present. Okay, so let's get cracking with it. It's an interesting question we've been asked to talk about, which is not so much about shared value, which is the theme of the entire conference. And I'm just going to do this so I can check you guys out better. Eusebius, you need to just check time with me, so we've got 5 minutes to go. You'll let me know, right? But it's about the stumbling blocks of collectively creating shared value. So I'm going to dissect it and go to that first point, stumbling blocks, right? Maybe just, I'll run through all you guys, the whole lot of you, just quick ones. Let's start with you here. Stumbling blocks, maybe 3 key stumbling blocks to this wonderful vision that we've heard earlier of shared value. Because it's a nice, feel-good thing, isn't it?
I think, the lack, I would just go first of all, the lack of imagination about what is possible, and then turning that imagination into forecasted value that can be discussed then with each of the partners to involved in that particular ecosystem. I think that's a stumbling block, but we can do it. We can imagine and we can forecast change and forecast that value and bring that to the table.
Okay, got that right. You, son?
Well, I think firstly, businesses are set up to reify profit above everything else, and that's the way it's always been. So the stumbling block is that we need time. We need time, and we need education, and we need best practice examples of that don't talk to the social impact, but that talk to the profit. That's what business needs to hear.
See, they agree with you. Right, number 3, go ahead.
I have to agree with Ryan. I think it is, it's around a focus on profit as opposed to value, and I think that all too often we are held to account by the street rather than held to account by the broader stakeholder set, and the street is looking for what are your next quarter's results going to look like, and are there going to be an improvement on the last quarter? And as a consequence, we're chasing our tail to try and drive short-term profit as opposed to long-term value.
Okay, and let's get to the 4th of the panelists. David?
I think it's about belief. Because, yes, you can focus on the short-term profits and you're pushed to by shareholders and the markets, but most of these businesses were started by someone who actually had belief in the first place, that they could create something. And I think if you can rethink what you can create as a business, having that belief, you can do anything.
So stumbling block is all about belief. Interesting, we'll get to that. Yeah. Right, the last one, Miles?
So I'm just going to say why I'm here, and it's not to be the fifth wheel. My colleague Mandy is going to be presenting some work that we did for Unilever for OMO tomorrow, which was acknowledged at the Liquorice last year for shared value. And I think, and my perspective as a agency guy is we're trying to disrupt the agency model by being a digitally led agency. And I see technology as a way of solving a lot of the problems that the shared value issue has, by being able to give scale and engagement. And I think those scale and engagement are 2 major issues in terms of shared value. And technology, and you'll see from this case study and lots of the other work that we do, allows brands and businesses to be able to engage with millions of consumers at a scale, quickly, agilely, and it's great seeing a guy who's come up with a business model to be able to deliver medicine. I think that's amazing. But my question would be, what's the time to market to get that to scale? And one of the great things about, so for OMO, for example, we've created a maths app that allows kids all over the country to be able to improve their maths learning. In South Africa, it's down at the bottom of the tables in terms of maths literacy. And what allows OMO to be able to do is to be able to deliver on its brand purpose of improving human potential and helping mums and dads help their kids
Okay.
succeed.
What I'll do for the remainder of the 21 minutes we have is we're not necessarily going to go in order. I'm going to leave it up to you guys. If you want to, if I don't ask you a question and you want to say something, just raise your hands and go ahead, okay? So who wants to answer this one here? What's the bottom line of shared value? Go ahead.
Well, the bottom line is a new way of improving business. It's not about, and we've got to stop thinking about here's profits and here is business competitiveness and here's social impact. And you know they're not. We've got to understand that social impact can drive profits. And so, as the term I use often is schizophrenic. I mean, you actually need a schizophrenic.
Okay, but I mean, let's clear this up. If the bottom line of business normally would be profits, and now we're talking about shared value, and you're obviously referring to shared value as a business imperative. It came up much earlier on, right? So then that bottom line of shared value would be manifested by what?
By more profit. By more profits and more innovation, more competitiveness, more attraction to staff, happier companies. You know, these are at the core of doing good business. Okay, so
but the ultimate still is the bottom line is still more profit. Happier staff, but still more profit at the end of the day.
Yeah. So by serving the social need, you can create more profit.
Okay, we'll get you in a sec. Just go ahead, yeah.
I think the bottom line is where it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle, right? When consumers are better off, and that makes the bottom line better off of the company, and it comes in that way rather than the other way around. So it's not what's left over and the third bottom line, what can we give back to society, but rather the better off consumers are, the better off the business becomes. And if we can get that right, it creates a self-perpetuating cycle of ripple growth.
And that's the point you made earlier about the brand, isn't it? That the consumer ultimately doesn't need the brand needs the...
That's right.
I think you said that, yeah. All right. Go ahead, you want to add to that?
Bottom line is about the nature of profit. You said more profit. So no, it's not more profit. It's the nature of profit. Profit that advances these columns, these SDGs, is superior profit. And that's the bottom line. It's superior profit because it creates a condition for all of these things to perpetuate.
Okay, so you're talking about the change of the nature of profit. In typical society, by most people, if you said determine or define profit, it should be, income minus expense, very, very simply. You're saying the nature of profit also needs a rethink, or has been rethought. Explain?
Well, it's that the profit is essential to expanding the proposition of advancing against these unmet needs and these problems. But that's the point, is that it's profit created that does that, and therefore perpetuates a sustainable society. I mean, the ultimate goal of business should be business that advances against all these objectives with zero footprint.
Okay, you want to come in there. Go
I
ahead.
mean, I think that's great, but my challenge would be I think you're going to struggle to convince a lot of boardrooms that there's good profit and bad profit. I mean, I believe that, but I think we're going to struggle. And I think the only way we're going to get businesses to really embrace this is to think about and acknowledge that, I mean, you saw the chart up there on FMCG companies and which ones were performing better from a return on equity. And if we have data to show that the business that are focusing on sustainable long-term profits are the ones that are also investing in society and baking purpose into their brand, then that's a much more compelling argument to business than saying, well, there's two kinds of profits, and some profit that's good and some profit that's bad.
I think, Ryan, you said when you presented, you asked the House about whether companies they know were engaging in good value and shared value, and well, the answer was pretty obvious, isn't it? Afraid to ask the other one. What does that tell you about society? What does it tell you about marketers? Because you also need to market the concept. And what does it tell you about consumers?
Well, I think business as usual is entrenched, and I think it's beyond some social programs, staff volunteering, maybe changing the cover of the annual report to look more socially friendly. Most business is entrenched in a certain way of thinking and a certain way of being motivated. And I think it's obvious that the public still see that. And although probably everyone in this room philosophically buys into, or emotionally buys into shared value, they also recognize that it's not something that is even close to embedded. I think we're at the beginning of a journey, to use the same word. So I think it's going to take time. I think it's going to take time. It's going to take events like this, education. It's going to take a new breed of progressive leader, or cathartic moments, maybe in leaders that are really at the top of their game, to say, actually, this is really interesting, and not driven from the softer side of but this is really interesting for our business. Okay, and I think that's why shared value is powerful. Is that it's about enhancing the business through a lens, as opposed to doing business and then solving a few social challenges.
Okay, now, I've been watching some of the people in the earlier part when the whole concept of shared value was played out, just from that initial talk, right? And why do I get the impression that this could well be the story of the emperor with no clothes? And everybody's like, oh, shared value. But privately, they say, they're talking about CSI. Aren't we talking about the same thing? No?
Definitely not.
No? Tell us where the difference is.
Well, I mean, CSI is an important component, I think, but there are many ways in which businesses contribute toward social progress or betterment of society. And what we find is that often those are very distributed right across the organization and live in silos, and they live in people's KPIs. And they're not aggregating to one idea, and they're not linking back up to that single purpose. And business just carries on. And that's why there might be some kind of, question marks in people's minds, because when you go back to the office, then you've got to go back to the scorecard that measures you differently to what the purpose is.
So if we follow what you're saying, then is it fair to say that in a few years' time, if more and more companies buy into shared value, then CSI, and you said it's a component, but effectively it should then die a natural death in terms of the charitable arm of what we do?
No, it should be elevated in a new and different way. So, like what Paul Polman has done in a very good way is he's elevated the way the whole business gets measured, right? So that it's held at the leadership level, and then that cascades down. So it's not about CSR dying or foundations dying or where you contribute across the organization dying. It's about lifting them up to one central measurement that links directly to your purpose. So what you say is actually what you do.
Elevated the way business gets measured. That's a fascinating concept in South Africa. And I know, Miles, you want to say something, keeping in mind that many South Africans historically, and now 23 years into democracy, believes that the big business who owns just about the majority of South Africa just rip off the majority of South Africans. We'll get to that in a second. Go ahead. Your thoughts, Mike? Miles?
I think when it really works is, as a couple of the speakers said, is when it's baked into the purpose of the brand. I'll give you an example of another client that we work with, Amarula, 25-year-old plus brand, and an African brand. And if you know the brand well, there's an elephant on the bottle. And they've been had that as a kind of brand asset for years, and nobody really thought about it. And they've actually, and the way that the product's created is that they've got these marula trees, and marula berries fall down from the trees. You can't cultivate them; they only grow naturally. And the elephants are part of the ecosystem. And they realized that because of poaching, that there were fewer elephants, and that was having impact on the marula trees and the fruitfulness of the marula trees, and which was having a business impact on them. So what they've done is they've elevated the role of this, what was just a kind of brand badge, to becoming central part of their marketing communications and their business. And so then we're now putting an ecological potential disaster of an African elephant being killed by poachers every 15 minutes into their marcoms. And then what that does is it means that the whole business is behind that initiative, and consumers become part of it. So we've got a little web tool where consumers can go in and create their own designed elephant, name it, and share it on social media. They feel part of the brand. And it may seem trite, but it's actually involving lots of consumers, and then the business donates money to helping preserve African elephants as a result of it. So it becomes baked into the purpose of the brand rather than just a sponsorship opportunity.
Okay, but on this point, it's incredibly good. About 8 minutes to go, right? In terms of then businesses being measured by a different purpose, a different standard, right? So is that being done? And I'll leave it to any one of you to answer this. Is that being done in South Africa? Are there examples of businesses being measured differently by the people, by the consumers? Yeah?
Well, look, I think the shared value movement actually dovetails very well with the movement in integrated reporting, which is about it's about what shared value are you creating. No longer do you have your financial report and then your report to society. You need to think of a coherent approach to doing business in which everything is integrated. So I think to the extent that companies are taking on the integrated reporting agenda, and that is a big movement. You know, South Africa is a leader at that with the King Codes. I think they are starting to measure themselves differently, and there are frameworks and governance frameworks are already in place that you can start measuring shared value through an integrated.
How is it measured on a balance sheet?
Well,
that'd be a big challenge, yeah.
Well, a balance sheet only measures, that's a problem, right? So the balance sheet
isn't that the fundamental problem? Because as we spoke earlier on, and I think one of you made the point that most of the people here are involved in communications, but somebody also said that you need to then get the buy-in of the boardroom. So if the boardroom's not seated here today, then there needs to be a cell from this group here to that boardroom.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, whatever happens then, it still needs to be communicated in a way that we don't quite know how to measure on the balance sheet.
We don't know how to do this yet, right? So I think there are frameworks that do set in place a more holistic way of measuring value, whether it's financial or social. But you know, to my mind, when it will become meaningful is when you can say, through this initiative, this new product, this is what the impact has been on the balance sheet, and here are social metrics that we also put with those numbers. So to a degree, Mark spoke about the Tanzanian example. You know, their Yara could actually track through that intervention what markets were open to them. So there's definitely a balance sheet element to that. But on the development world is very skilled at measuring what social impact that intervention has had. And that's a very different type of metric. It might be jobs created, it might be lower mortality, it might be better nutritional levels. So I think just in measurement, we need to start pairing the financial impact alongside the social impact, even though they'll be in different metrics.
Okay, now I think is open to every one of you to come up with solutions. I'll get to you in a second. You want to go ahead first, yeah?
Sorry, I just wanted to say I don't think it should be measured on the balance sheet at all. I mean, I think it should be straight to the P&L, right? I mean, that's where you want to be.
Just repeat that straight to?
The profit and loss statement.
Okay.
Yeah, it should be to the income statement, because if you get shared value right, and you know, if I take Unilever as an example, you know, they've created 64 new startups to help co-create new product for them. That creates new economies, which creates new incremental opportunity for other people to ripple affect their brand penetration, which means that you get more bottom line growth at the end, which is on the P&L, not on the balance sheet. And if you can get that, I think if the CEO has to put their balls on the line to go, we're going over the edge of how we are historically measured.
Okay,
we're going to change the way we measure.
Are we not doing it as a country? We don't have a lot of time, unfortunately, but the issue of South Africa in terms of giving procurement to emerging companies, predominantly black companies, all disadvantaged, not even historically disadvantaged, they remain disadvantaged, right? Can that be seen as shared value? What I'm saying, does government need to speak the same talk?
Absolutely, it's got to be completely aligned.
But they're not doing that, right?
It's paralleled. It's not necessarily integrated.
Okay. You wanted to say something.
Well, there's two questions. So the last one is also interesting. I just want to say, yes, at the initiative level, when we create a new business model, we can measure and track their social progress. We can track the economics to the company. But at the higher level, company-wide, the market and the people value an idea. I mean, why is Tesla more valuable, having only made losses, than to GM and Ford? Because the market is recognizing a platform and an idea that has immense potential. So this notion in the boardroom that we're not going to do this because we can't see the numbers is not right either, right? It's, the power of the idea and its potential and its platform is worth tons, and the market actually recognizes
Do you not think that if I look at the world narrative...
But I wanted to also answer your second question.
Okay, we'll get to that in a second. Looking at the world narrative in terms of what happened in the USA, and we can debate whether the person who leads the country is dead, well, it's their choice ultimately, but certainly a reaction that's taken place. Brexit, another reaction. There are many examples around the world. There are movements in South Africa currently making sense, right? That in fact, the world will want to judge things very, very differently.
I think so.
But I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, in the business world, judgment is by customers and by consumers, and they judge with their wallets. And again, I think that's how we need to place this to sell it into the boardroom. And we can when we can build case studies like the Unilever one and show where brands are outperforming. You look at Unilever, and they've just released a statement showing that of the 50 or so lead brands that they've got globally, the ones that have social purpose built into their brands outperform the ones that don't. And if you show that to other CEOs, then that's compelling evidence to show that actually, who cares about the metrics? The ultimate metrics is that this is going to drive market and growth for them.
Okay. You wanted to add another thing, Aaron?
Well,
Mark?
to your point about small businesses, and I mean, the unfortunate part is that we need regulation to say that we should empower black businesses, or that we should look at vulnerable youth and find ways to prepare them for jobs, train them. The unfortunate thing is that we have to need regulation because it makes so much sense long term, again, when vast numbers of businesses are successful and vast number of youth find jobs, actually your markets have expanded in terms of your future consumers. And it makes so much sense long term. And so yes, it is shared value. Unfortunately, it needs to be regulated. I think it, some cases, has to be. But it should, in fact, be part of a long-term strategy of almost any business.
We've got a minute to go. Ryan, help us with this one here, particularly in South Africa. For many people who are not seated here, there's only one shared value they're interested in. They want a physical stake in all the big companies of this country, keeping in mind where they've come from and where they are now. They don't want BEE that's going to a select few. They want to have a stake. That's the shared value they're talking about. How should one respond to that?
Well, I think one of the challenges for shared value in South Africa specifically has been that we've taken a BEE compliance approach, right? So we have a government framework, and when you have a government framework regulating it, the typical response of businesses is to let's comply with the letter of the law, right? So in a way, to some degree, I think energy invested in getting scorecards of BEE has cannibalized energy, or is cannibalizing energy, which might go into looking for more innovative, broader programs of business to achieve some of the goals that BEE is trying to achieve. So it's a difficult topic because if you didn't have that compliance, would 9 out of 10 firms even make an effort? You do need a stick. So I think what would be powerful in South Africa is for government not to ever regulate shared value and say this is what it looks like and this is what you need to do. I think they would kill it dead, as they say.
Let's wrap up. David, in 30 seconds, I'll leave you with the last, David Blyth, that is, so what's the, and I'm restricting to South Africa, what's the one thing under this umbrella of shared value that South Africans, here, boardrooms, and everywhere else needs to be doing immediately? Just the one thing.
Wow. I think if we put the people of our country at the heart of the problem, then if we focus our businesses on doing more problem-seeking first and less solutioning around their own business models, we start to focus on real systemic issues. We've got real systemic issues in this country: infrastructure, education, etc., healthcare. How can we make sure that the people of this country are at the heart of business strategy? I would say that that's a
And that
good
would
intent.
be the ultimate radical economic transformation of shared value another time. Thanks, guys. Our time is up. I suggest that there'll be lots of comments that you may have around what was discussed. Do tweet it, #shared value, right? And the other hashtag over there, you can see it. And besides myself and Eusebius will pass it on, many of the panelists I know are on social media as well. So if you tweet to them, hopefully they'll answer you directly. I think that'll be absolute. That's a different way of shared value on a broader space amplified. Okay, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you.